Hello everyone. In today's lecture, I am going to deal with the development of art and architecture in India. And I would be looking at this idea of development from a particular framework for some time. And that framework is framework of looking at looking at the development of art from evolutionary point of view, from A stage to B stage, from B to C, and from C to D. So something which is linear in sense, and every subsequent stage is considered to be a kind of progression over its previous position. So it is a temporal, starting from the earliest period of Indian history and then moving on to the subsequent phases of the history. So let me develop one very simple and broad outline. Uh, we will make a continuum starting from prehistoric India, proto-historic India, and then historic India, that is Vedic period, and then Mauryan period, post-Mauryan period, Gupta period, on and on till the end of this ancient period and before beginning of Islamic uh, rule in India. So that is early medieval India. So what is it which we would like to understand from this today's discussion? We would like to understand a broad patterns which were becoming noticeable in the field of art and architecture. And what are these patterns? Basically, we try to look in terms of its transition from simple simple structure to the complex structure, simple form to the complex form. So this is what is this framework about. That is taking it for granted that transition from simple to complex is progression, and vice versa movement is evidence of regression. And it is for this reason that after Indus Valley civilization, which was an advanced level of civilization, uh, and it had all evidences in the form of its material, which were indicative of level and the height this particular civilization has achieved in terms of complexity. So let us first talk about in prehistoric time, the people in India or in other part of the world, like any other part of the world or any other civilizations, would also resort on the usage of tools made from the stones, pebbles. And with the advancement of time, with the passage of time, there was a obviously great degree of development from one form of tools to the other form of tools. So tools made up of stones did not continue to remain same. They were becoming more advanced, and they were becoming of finer quality. They were becoming sharper and more sophisticated. And unlike earliest form of tools, these tools, which were part of the later prehistoric time, were of finer nature, and they are also um, evidence of the fact that there was a great degree of geometric understanding. There was a great degree of concern around the proportion, around the weight, and around its portability, around its maneuverability. So these were the things which would be borne in mind at the later stage of the prehistoric time. So this movement from prehistoric time to the proto-historic time, that is a civilization, Indus Valley civilization, Mohenjo-daro. So in this civilization, the evidences of art are actually multiple. There are several examples, and there are several material examples of the art. So one may look at the way the house was made up, and the streets were designed, roads were actually built, and the very drainage system, and the the common bath, and many artifacts also talk a great deal about the aesthetic sense, which had become part of the yeah, our Indian culture, our Indian history. So aesthetic is something which is developing over time, and it is marked by a great degree of discontinuity. Mm. Things do not remain the same, but it is not complete departure from its previous form of the art. So there is a continuity as well as discontinuity, but it is discontinuity which we are all looking out for, so that we can understand how stage B is different from the stage A, that is the previous stage. So by the time of this Harappan civilization, we usually see that alongside the use of stone tools, there was a heavy emphasis on the use of brick, either sun-dried bricks or burnt bricks. So the brick was a major constituent of this culture, and then stone continued to remain in use, but it is brick which had taken over considerable part of the structures. As we move on to the Vedic civilization, yeah, Vedic period, which comes later on, later than Harappan civilization, and after Harappan civilization has disappeared. So Vedic civilization is basically marked by reversal. A reversal in the sense that people of this time are said to have used wooden stuff for most of their structures. So this is one very particular thing and very peculiar thing about the Vedic civilization. Rather than using sun-dried brick or burnt bricks or stone, this civilization and this period, people in this period were known for using wooden structure. So when we refer to James Ferguson, who had dealt with this idea of art and architecture, Indian art and architecture, history of Indian art and architecture, he has drawn a comparative picture, mm, of European art and architecture and Indian art and architecture. So he has come up with a very interesting framework where he is trying to uh, formulate an argument that European society, unlike Indian society, was highly educated, but when it came to the art and architecture, the European art and architecture were less advanced, whereas the Indian society was not as educated, was in fact uneducated. I mean, this is what quote unquote he has used this term for. But they were way ahead of European counterparts when it came to the art and architecture. So, in terms of the durability, in terms of the elegance, precision, and the skill, especially engineering skill, which was a very integral part of art and architecture. So this is the kind of contrast which he's trying to put forth, and he's trying to balance a demerit with the merits. So, but that is a contestable. That is not something which is a universal claim. It is very much subject to criticism. However, this is an interesting fact which we must all understand, and we must all be familiar with. So, what is happening in this Vedic time? The people are making considerable use of the wooden structure, And looking at this wooden structure, if you judge this use of wooden structure, you can say this was a kind of regression from previous culture, because the things and the structure which were evolved out of uh, the soil and the stone were of durable quality. Yeah, they lasted for longer than wooden. But one argument which I came to know from James Ferguson only, that wooden structure, when it came to use wooden structure, so carving wood and lifting wood and shifting wood from a place to the other place was anytime far easier than dealing with the bulky materials like a stone or soils, earthen materials. So, from this viewpoint, one may argue that this choice of wood might have been a tactful and strategic decision on the part of the Vedic civilization, but which is again not a very substantiated claim, but it is one of the assumptions, but logical assumptions which can be interrogated, investigated, and can be established. Anyway, so now let us move on to the further phase that comes the post-Vedic. That is the starting from the 6th century BC and then going on to this Mauryan period. And so in this period, what is happening in this? Because the Vedic civilization was basically about a social about it was also about it was about a social institution, and this social institution was replete with several problems which was not able to address the concerns of society of the contemporary time. So this 6th century BC was witness to a kind of revolution from this Vedic culture and from the social institution which was legitimated by this Vedic text. So, in this period, you have a series of developments. So, these religious movements that is known by the rise of Buddhism and the rise of Jainism. The rise of these two religious sects were actually seen in a reaction to the Vedic culture and the social institution which was consequent upon the Vedic text and the Vedic provision. So what is happening? Whereas this Vedic civilization was very in later part of the Vedic civilization, it was very particular about various ritual, and which was not possible without material condition. And this material condition is evident from the use of these altars, use of the fire, use of all the sacrificial materials, and then also this the procession, and also this elaborate rituals for the king ceremony, and elaborate rituals for the victories, and elaborate rituals before the war would be undertaken, the battle would be undertaken. There would be a lot of rituals. So, so this would all guide, and the term Vastu Shastra, basically. Vastu Shastra is all about architectural detail, not only from material point of view, also from a spiritual point of view. So this is where a considerable attention has been paid to these architectural details and its consequences. And in according to Vastu Shastra, it has been advised that what kind of structure is to be opted for and what kind of structure is to be avoided. So this is what it is all about. It is basically it lays down the framework for the proper location of things which are part of the interiors as well as the exterior, and also the very location of the structure. So where the Vastu Shastra considers various things, like it looks at the sun, it looks at where the wind is coming from in the most of the time, and it actually considers several factors. So let us not go into all this. Let us stick to this development. How this the Indian art and culture is moving from one phase to the other phase, and how is the later phase different from the previous phase. So basically, when you try to understand this, you must look at the complex nature of the art and architecture, which becomes part of the subsequent period. But interestingly, Vedic period continued to remain very simple because it was using wooden material. Although crafting and then inscribing wooden material was far easier, and there are many examples of the crafted and inscribed wooden structures. However, more or less, we come to the conclusion that this Vedic period was more or less simple as compared to the previous civilization, that is, Indus Valley civilization. Now, coming to this Buddhist and the Jainist period, and the Mauryan period. Let us put these two period together, and then understand what were the structures like. So during this period, the structures were basically the kind of structures which we have. These are basically stupas, pillars, edicts, and these chaityas and paintings, caves like Barabar caves, Sudama caves, and Ajanta cave, and then what do you call this Kanheri caves. These are all the caves which are actually related to the Jain and the Buddhist sect. And if you or if you look at these structures are way simpler than previous period because. But one thing, these structures, like the Buddhist and Jainist structures, are different from the previous. It is in terms of the material used for the making up of all these caves. So these caves are actually made from the rock. So stone carved out of the rock and the mountains, and sometimes developing the cave right inside the mountain. So this is the kind of development. So very organic development, and these stupas are complex as well as simple. Complex in the sense because there was a considerable attention paid to where what is going to be, like where the monks are going to be, and then where the assembly is going to be, prayer assembly, and where would be the relic of Buddha, and they would also consider the logical part in terms of its vicinity with the water, where they can fetch the water from, and dealing was taken care of because right within the cave there were small cell-like chambers where these monks are said to have taken meditative positions, and so these are the aspects which we must all pay attention to because culture is not something which is purely culture. It is very much part of our material day-to-day life. So our quotidian life and the culture both are embedded into each other. So we cannot see one without other. We will have to put both these variables into each other, and then we will have to understand a holistic picture. So this is what was the characteristic of this Buddhist period, Jainist period, and this Mauryan period, where you have great number of the stupas and this the railings and these stupas were when you look at I am not going into many architectural details, but if you simply look at these stupas, this most of these stupas are of semicircular shape. They are not angular. They are not angular. They are of dome shape, half semicircle, and then be, around that stupa, you have the kind of surrounding of fence. That is a one thing, and then the place where the entrance is set up. That is known for its peculiar makeup and peculiar constitution, where there is a lot of attention paid to, especially in terms of its the railing. So they have tried to inscribe messages, and they have tried to inscribe various natural and various social themes into those stones. So, so two things. One is that unlike Vedic period where wood is in to prominent use. This Buddhist period, Mauryan period is when the stone is again into heavy use. But stone usage in this period is different from the Stone Age, because in Stone Age people were using stones to develop the tools and little more things. But in this period, you have massive structure coming out of the stone. So rock cut temples, rock cut caves. So there are various examples. So these are the things which you must all bear into the mind. Another thing, as you move forward, when Buddhism and Jainism achieved a great degree of height in terms of popularity and in terms of acceptance all over society, there was again counter revolution. So Vaishnavism, that is a Vedic supporters and the followers, they rose in rebellion and then tried to restore the Vedic structure, but they did not continue with the wooden structure. They stuck to what they received from its immediate previous predecessor. So that is continuity in terms of the usage of the stone. But the structures became very religious, and it all started from the Buddhist and Jainism period, because they were trying to establish a kind of sect, sect-based supremacy. So it was a basically, so that is why I always call that this art and architecture uh, undoubtedly relate to immaterial spiritual aspect of the life, but simultaneously this art and architecture is also rooted into the materiality. And what is this materiality? This The political this contestation and this competition, inter-sect competition, inter regional competition, and inter political alliances competitions. So these are the kind of things which went on to become part of the art and architecture. So art and architecture eventually became an instrument of political supremacy. So when Mauryan period came to an end, Vedic civilization, I mean that Vedic cultures again resurfaced. It resurfaced in the form of Vaishnavism and in the form of this Brahmanism, to be more precise. So this time structures which were developed, these structures were used to house particular deities like Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva. Very unlike these stupas which were meant for the Jain monks and the Buddhist monk. So this is one thing. Now let us talk about what Indian art and architecture goes through with the coming of foreigners into India from Persia, from Greek, from Rome, and from this northwestern part of the India, and also from the Central Asia. So various tribes were coming from, and various rulers were trying to invade upon India at various point of time. So with these invasions and with these incursions and with this contact in various forms, also contact through these traders and pilgrims who would come to these places. So there would be kind of cultural exchange. So when this cultural exchange took place, so we noticed a great degree of change in the field of art and architecture, because this Indian structure, which were of organic nature, which had evolved largely from its own material, from its own environment and landscape, were soon in contact with the agencies, agents, and factors of outside world. So when these came together, there was the relationship was not that of resistance, especially in the field of art and architecture. It was more of fusion. So they were actually getting intertwined, and a new form of art was coming into picture, which gave rise to different schools of this art and architecture. And I mean, they are known by various names. One is like this Hellenistic school, so Hellenistic style of art, and that Greek style of art, Indo-Greek. Indo-Greek. So that is Indo-Greek. In Indo-Greek, you have Greek influence. That is a Hellenistic influence, and then you have the Greco-Indian and Greco-Roman Indian. So this fusion is taking place from various angles. It is very complex. So it is not uh, marriage between only two different cultures. It is also amalgamation of various cultures. So India turned out to be a place where various cultures came and they settled down and they left their imprint. And the result was a development and the rise of a complex form of art and architecture, which was evident from all these in these structures which we have. Like if you look at this Buddhist sculpture, sculpted image, or Jain's sculpted image, you will notice that there are many elements and many aspects and the nuances which are result of the external factors like the Greek, Persian, and Roman culture. So that is one thing. And then what happens? We must also look at this culture and this development of art not only in terms of political assertion and the religious assertion. Uh, this art and culture, as I told you, were also meant to address the material conditions. So this art and architecture were purposeful. These were purposeful, and this art and architecture. So especially when you look at this structure of the whales and this common bath, and the palaces for the residences for the purpose of residence, and this development of these capes for the purpose of and then canal building, dam building. So these are the structures which are examples of purposive art and architecture, where they are trying to meet the material needs of the people. Now, coming to this other aspect, which is equally important, that is the expressive and communicative aspect of art and architecture, and this is where you try to put your focus on painting, where painting is actually trying to be very expressive, not only in terms of the aesthetic appeal, also in terms of trying to convey certain messages, stories, and the tales. So when you look at all these paintings of the Ajanta, Ellora, and other parts of this, all these inscriptions and these paintings, so it is the purpose is communicative and it is expressive. So what is happening? These art and architectures are not only art and architecture for the aesthetic purposes. They are going beyond the aesthetic purpose. So their area is actually going extending into the political domain, religious domain, spiritual domain, and material domains. And so this is all about. And what happens when you look at all this development? So this Mathura style of art, and then Gandhar school of art, which was which had developed in northwestern part of India, that is the Gandhar. Gandhar. And then you have the Mathura style of art, and then you have the Dravida style of art, Vesara style of art, which was a combination of Nagara style of art, which represented northern part of India, and the Dravida part of this is art, which represented the southern and the Deccan India. So this Vesara style of art was basically a combination of the northern as well as Dravidian style. Other than rise of these various schools of arts and styles, we must also pay attention to further development. Uh, so when you look at these architectures, they are no longer confined to simplicity. They are with the time becoming far more complex. In terms of height, in terms of space they are taking, and in terms of the engineering skill and the precision it is involving, and in terms of thought which is going into making of all this. So this is very important. This is very important. And before art and architecture goes through this process of Indo-Islamic fusion, Indo-European fusion. We must understand this ancient period where fusion is part of our art and architecture. But despite all this fusion, one thing which is very particular about Indian art and architecture, it managed to retain much of its distinct nature. Hmm. This is what is making and distinguishing India and Indian culture from the European counterparts, Western counterparts, where the art became very homogeneous and very controlled, whereas in India it was very diverse. And it was very regional, and although there were certain popular trends, but despite all these trends, there were simultaneously multiple trends which were also part of this. So there was no homogenized kind of art and architecture which had come to characterize European art and architecture. So that is it for today. I will discuss some more aspect in relation to this development of art and architecture during ancient India, and that is it. And if you have any question, you may ask.